Thank you all for sticking with this. I can't say enough about what we just heard in the sanctuary, but we're at the point where we're going to have our panel discussion, we have three panelists with us who have various stories. So I'm not going to give a whole lot of introduction to each one of them, just enough to let you know what their name is and all that, but I don't want to cut into their time for them to share their story. The first person is Boo Tyson. She is a native of North Carolina. She is a PK kid. If you're a Methodist in the North Carolina Conference, once you hear the name Tyson, you shouldn't have to say anything more. So
it's kind of changing.
Yeah.
But there was a time.
Yeah.
You had to explain which one you came from.
Yes.
I'm with Vernon.
Yeah, her father is Vernon Tyson. She also happens to be the sister of Dr. Tim Tyson, who is at Duke University. If you remember his book, Blood Does Sign My Name. And I know Boo personally because she and I worked for a while on the same coalition called the Coalition for Homelessness and Housing in Fort Wayne County. And all I can say about Boo is, if you need someone to organize your army, she's the person that you go to. She is a community organizer, in very good sense, and she is community organized for a variety of issues, including LGBT rights in various places, including Alabama, which probably was a real challenge down there. She was also headed Mainstream Coalition in Kansas, which has sort of now become like Alabama. She has a MDiv from Divinity School at Wake Forest University, and she has an MSW thing from UNC Chapel Hill.
No, BSW from NC State.
Oh yes, thank goodness for that. So at any rate, so she's going to share some of her story growing up in a Methodist parsonages, growing up as Methodist, and about her coming out experience in the Methodist Church and where she is right now in her journey. The next person is also someone I've gotten to know personally in the last few years, who's so organized it's almost pathetic. I mean, he organized a political campaign in Charlotte. He organized the Jack Rum Conference 3 years ago. I mean, he's got a degree from UNC Chapel Hill, I won't hold that against him, and also from Syracuse University, Master of Public Administration, and is now approaching his second year at Wesley Seminary.
Henry, he organized a Christmas cantata at Calvary United Methodist Church, which was probably harder than any of the rest of them.
Debbie was one of our 3 wise women that year.
And yes, also one of his other jobs was he was the music director at Calvary United Methodist Church, so he stayed quite busy while he was in college and still busy today. His unique story, and I'm sure, and I'll let him go in a little bit further, he was on his way to ordination in the United Methodist Church. And then he decided to come out to his district superintendent. And I think it was a matter of don't ask, don't tell, and he just could not simply abide by that. And we now have another unfortunate loss to the Presbyterians. So he'll go further into his story. The other, next, is Reverend Joe Cobb. Now I mentioned about one of the few pastors who hold the distinction of being frocked, defrocked, and then refrocked. Well, Joe holds that other distinction. He was frocked, defrocked, and then refrocked in another denomination. He was a Methodist pastor in the West Kansas Conference, and then he came out, and then he was defrocked, and now he's refrocked at the Metropolitan Community Church, where he serves as pastor in Roanoke, Virginia. And he's here today to explain his journey in that. In fact, he has a book outside the area here called Our Family Coming Out. I'm sure he can tell you more about that book and what that meant. So I'm going to turn it over to them. Each one will tell their story about 7 or 8 minutes each, and then we'll open it up to you all to ask some questions. Thank you very much for all participation.
The boys say I have to go first. All right, can you hear me?
Yes.
All right. I've got a limp knee here, but I'm going to stand up for a few minutes. I really am not here to tell you my early story. I think a lot of you have heard that. I grew up in this annual conference as part of this Tyson family and moved around from parsonage to parsonage. And in 1979 was the first time that 1978 actually was the first time I ever thought to myself that I might be gay. 1979 was the first time that I knew it. 1981 was the first time I told anybody that was not my siblings, and that was my parents. My father actually asked me in 1981 if I had a fear that I might be gay. He thought he was ahead of the curve a little bit. He was not expecting the answer, which was, Daddy, I don't have a fear of being gay. I think I just am. At which point my mother, Martha, came home from the grocery store, and she walked in the house, and I said, I don't think we should talk about this anymore. And I went upstairs, and about a half an hour later, Mama was at the bottom of the stairs crying, and Martha Bowie, which was what I grew up being called, Martha Bowie, please come down here. And I knew that he had told her, and my family entered really probably what was about a 15-year journey of struggling about how to love each other with that news. And we did. One of the things I like about the story is that we, even when we were not okay with each other, we stayed in relationship and in loving relationship. So, but I also was a youth leader in this conference in those days. Man, the summer events in this conference for youth, I think, are still happening. And amazing. And the people and the things that happened there, marked my life. And the sad and scary part was that I kept running into young Methodist people in gay bars and other places. And after we got out of the embarrassment and shame of seeing each other, and back in those days, it was, you had to get signed in to go to a gay bar. There was a lot of shame, and we didn't much want to see each other. But I kept running into other Methodist young people, and all of us thought we were having to make a choice, whether we were gay or Christian. And so, being the person that I was, very privileged with a lot of love, I went to some of the youth leaders in this conference and suggested that perhaps we expand the human sexuality class that they already taught to include some discussion about homosexuality. And I essentially became blackballed by the conference. I never got a response to that letter that I sent in 1979 from somebody who had known me all my life. And then the leaders just started acting like they didn't know me. And I got the message, and I went away for a long time. And in the meantime, I went wandering in the wilderness and found that God was with me, even if the church wasn't. And had some healing that happened in my life. And later in my adult life, ran into Laurie Hayes Kaufman at Calvary Church, really around homelessness ministries. But I had said I wasn't going to have nothing to do with that Methodist preacher. And that's not how that worked out. She became my preacher and sort of welcomed me back into the fold and did a lot of healing work with me. And I ended up going to divinity school in my late 30s, which was something I really had wanted to do all my life, knowing that I would never be a United Methodist minister, but knowing that I wanted to go and write and study and talk about the things of God and see where that took me. I got involved in Reconciling ministries during the mid-90s and helped lead some of the stuff that's happened early in this conference. I really want to tell you, though, that I am now not an active person in the United Methodist Church. And the thing I want you to know is that the reason for that, for me personally, that there just wasn't a way to be in it. Particularly if you feel called to the clergy. It's hard for me to sit. I'm not a good layperson. Those of you who have tried to have me be your lay people know that. And it's hard for me to sit. It's just hard. It's hurtful. But I used to say that I was on the front line of something. Back in the day, when you needed somebody to talk about being gay and being Christian, you had to call me. because I was one of the few people who in some ways was privileged enough and loved enough that I would just say it out loud. And so I was talking for a lot of people. But what happens when you're at the front of a line sometimes is you take some thorns in your face and you get hurt. And I was okay about that. I felt very strong. But scars happen. And I have to say that 20 years go by and I'm doing this work, and at some point I realized that I was outside a general conference. I think it was Pittsburgh, but I can't really remember. But I remember being outside the building praying about getting in, and there was something in my soul that said, "You begging to get in this is not okay. I'm not okay," and I felt the rawness of those scars. And I realized that sort of on a personal level, it was hurting me spiritually. I was part of kind of a political movement, a place I was also trying to worship. But there's also, I moved around. So I want to say that I'm concerned about the geographic situation in the United Methodist Church. Because what I discovered when I left here, I went to Alabama. I was hired by the Unitarians to do organizing within the Christian community in Alabama around LGBT issues in 2000. I could not find a Methodist church in Alabama to go to. The language in the Methodist churches in Alabama sounded a lot like Baptist to me. And I couldn't find a church home there, and then I did organizing work. And then I moved to Kansas. And the only way I would have gone to Kansas was to have gone to Alabama first. No offense to the Kansas in the room, but when I got there, I discovered a very different environment than what we have here, which was, there were more gay ministers in Kansas you could shake a stick at, but they were all closeted, but everybody knew it. It wasn't like here, where if I had tried to become a minister, that you guys wouldn't have let me move around the annual conference with a woman and move from parsonage to parsonage. That just wouldn't happen. Someone would say, "Boo, what, you know." There, it was weird. But let me say, I'm not in Kansas anymore. The result of that is that there's also a lack of conversation in some ways, because the progressive Methodists in Kansas want to protect the closeted clergy. So I kid you not, there was a UCC church in Lawrence, Kansas, great church. Everybody in town who was progressive went there. Of course, everyone wanted me to go there, so I did. And not for very long. But it was right across the street from the Methodist church. I'll just say this, the woman serving the Methodist church looked a lot like me. You can read between the lines. And anyway, I was in the UCC one time in Lawrence, Kansas, and we got to the first hymn. And I stood up to sing it, and I knew I was in the wrong place. And I knew that if I crossed the street that they were going to be singing a hymn that I knew. So I literally got up and went to the Methodist across the street during church service and left UCC and went to the Methodist church. I do love you people. I can't help it. But anyway, I did that, and sure enough, when I got in there, they were singing their first hymn too, and it was a hymn I knew, and that was good. I went for a couple of Sundays, and then I was approached by an older woman in the church who was leader of the progressive group in the church, and she said, "Boo, we see you're coming, and we like that, we know who you are." When I got there, I did a video for them for their annual conference around this issue, and so they knew who I was. And they said, "But we do want you to know that we don't want you to come here and start talking about that stuff." I said, "Okay, yes ma'am." But what I want you to hear in that is that I stopped going. And I got the message, that it wasn't safe. They felt like that my presence and my talking about LGBTQI issues would reflect on their minister who looked a lot like me and might get her in trouble. So I just want to say that I have some concerns in some ways about how the system works to protect people who are living, and I understand that's complicated lives, and I get all that, but the other thing I'll just say that being a Southerner, that I look and it appears to me that we already have sort of a geographic apartheid happening People used to say, Boo, if you move to Oregon, they'll ordain you and you go be a Methodist preacher. It now appears I could move almost anywhere except the South. I mean, based on my Facebook page. There are people marrying people, getting married themselves, very openly living as gay clergy in the United Methodist Church. And then right under that are people who everyone knows are gay, but no one said it out loud. And I have great concern about that, because I think that in some ways then that puts the weight of what's happening in the church on the backs of a smaller group of people. And the other thing I do want to raise, and I'm very glad that Reverend Schaefer is back in the church. I think that's a good thing. But I do want to raise the issue about not just Reverend Schaefer, but in general, that when we make exceptions to the rules that are actually the rules, and then we celebrate them, the exceptions being made, that there are people for whom, and I am one of those, that the exceptions are very painful because there's not going to be one made for me. And that's okay, I live with that, but I want us to be aware when we celebrate the exceptions, that is sometimes at the expense of for someone who's not had an exception made. And the other thing I'll just tell you from a community organizing standpoint is that the church has not had to live with its policy, with the actual consequence of its own policies when we make exceptions. I'm not saying I don't want us to make exceptions. In fact, I want you to be serving a Methodist church. But I do think we need to be careful in our political organizing that we don't make so many exceptions that the church does not feel the pressure. I'm just going to tell you right now, if everybody I knew that was serving as an LGBT clergy in the United Methodist Church were to turn purple for a day, that I think the United Methodist Church would be shocked at what it was going to have to do in appointment time. So the one thing I also want to say is that one of the reasons I'm no longer part of this too is that I'm ready for something bold. How about a national coming out where all clergy all go to their district superintendents 3 weeks before conference and declare themselves to be part of the LGBT community? And we just shut this thing down. We are the only, we have an appointment system and you have to have a slot for every person and a person for every slot. And I just want to suggest that if we don't make a vote change soon, that perhaps we need to make a strategy change soon, because I'm not sure the church is feeling the pressure that it needs to feel to change. All right, I've probably taken more of my time than I had. I do want to say just that I knew Jack Crum. Where's Kay Crum? And my family, we love Jack and Kay Crum, and he used to show up at our house every now and again and come visit with Vernon. And my dad, I thought is a great man, and I thought he usually stood for what he believed in. But my dad taught me that Jack Crum was sort of like his conscience. I mean, Jack Crum pushed my dad. And I just want to say I'm just honored to be here, and I think that if you don't know Jack Crum's history, you ought to go read it. But that this name and being here today, this is important stuff. And he was a very important person because he had the nerve, to be quite honest, to just keep saying and doing and believing what God put on him. And that at our house, we were taught that we should honor people like Jack Crum. So I'm proud that I'm getting to do that today. Thank
you. Good morning, y'all. As I stand here, I want to first say what an honor it is to be back in North Carolina, far away from the great northern DC. It's so nice to be here, and it's so humbling to see so many people who have made this path and forged this way. It hasn't been an easy road for me, but whenever I'm back in North Carolina, especially Durham, it seems, I'm reminded and humbled by how many people have worked so hard to clear a way and to continue to make a path for justice and light to shine through. I grew up in Concord, North Carolina. My mother is a minister of music. She's sitting right there. I grew up in Methodist megachurches, large United Methodist churches, very much in the South and in the Southern tradition. And my experience throughout this journey has been one of grace and rejection, of welcome and not so welcome. You know, and I think it's important to hold those things in tension and to be honest about that reality. You know, I grew up serving as a trustee, as a choir member, as a volunteer in the kitchen at my United Methodist Church in Concord, North Carolina, until I was 16 and came out as gay. And my parents are good folks, you know, that they loved me so much. But when I came out, they performed what I would call an exorcism. You know, I was on the floor. They prayed for Satan to come out of my body because that's what they thought was the best thing they could do. Because they were good people that loved their son. And throughout the South, there's lots of people that really love their kids and do that because that's what their church tells them to do. In the same way, my United Methodist Church that raised me, that loved me, said, you're welcome to come and sit in the pew, but you're not welcome to serve, and you're not welcome as you are fully. And so I left, and in the midst of this rejection and grace, a Methodist church up the road took me in. And a pastor who had had my mom as his middle school chorus teacher and as his minister of music just happened to be back in the area and welcomed me in. And it was because of him, because of counseling and prayer and time together, that my family was knit back together. That we came back to the Methodist Church and back together as one family. After that, I finished up at Chapel Hill and got introduced to the wonderful people at Calvary United Methodist Church. Just by chance, my professor of music said, hey, I've got a church job, do you want it? I said, yeah, you know, I could really use the money. And walked in and met Gail Felton and Lori Hayes Kaufman and had no idea who they were. I can still remember the first time, you know, I was Southern. Lori asked me, I used some blood language in him, and Lori said, how do you get washed in the blood and come out clean? And it blew my mind. And I spent 3 years there. And they showed me that church was something that I could be a part of. And that the vision of community that I didn't know existed really did exist. And in a way, I hate them for it. Because Lori and Gail and Debbie and everybody else at that church hooked me on something that I still haven't seen yet. But it's that picture of the kingdom that I got some small taste of that has me addicted to this mess. And for that I am grateful and deeply regretful. After undergrad, I went to Syracuse to do an MPA, and as soon as I showed up there, I knew that I shouldn't be there. I knew that I was supposed to be back in North Carolina or DC or somewhere in a seminary. And so I applied and tried to come back to North Carolina Conference. And again, that was an experience of grace and rejection. In the opening worship of our candidacy retreat, I walked up to the altar, and I can say altar here because y'all still believe it's an altar. I get in trouble in the Presbyterian church for saying altar. But I walked up to the altar and heard this voice in the back of my head that said, you're welcome here, and nobody can take that welcome away. And I went to my group and found out that not only was I fortunate to have friends there, but I had a group that cared deeply about queer inclusion. And it was this experience of grace and hope and safety in the midst of a very scary process. And then I went for my psychological evaluation. And I found out that in the midst of a generic test, lots of different questions, a gay test had been included. And the conference psychologist looks at me and says, well, you're not gay. I said, okay. And he showed me the paper and said, you're 2 points away. But you're not still in writing, please. And that experience of not even knowing that I was being tested, and not even knowing that the trap was set, made it really clear what the underlying structure was. And so I went to Wesley, and I've had a wonderful time at Wesley, but even there, this progressive, mainline, denominational seminary that hails itself as a place of acceptance and equality, even there, this undergirding fear reigns. You know, we have professors that try so hard to help you closet yourself, to help you hide. I'll never forget, I had a boyfriend of mine come and visit early on during a worship service, and one of my dear professors there told me, no, 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 you can't bring boyfriends to worship, that's not safe. And so I was serving the United Methodist Church, and this unsafety and this dis-ease just continued until I realized that the biggest thing I had, the voice and the passion that had fed me and kept me alive, was being taken away. I no longer had that bravery. We went together to Frank's trial, and when we were questioned, I couldn't say anything. We went before the Judicial Council, and one of the members of the Judicial Council asked me, "Are you gay?" And I couldn't say anything. And it was just too deeply painful. And so for me, I left, because that's what I had to do. I went and spoke to my district superintendent in the Baltimore-Washington Conference and said, "Here you go. I'm done. I can't play this game." And my fear and my concern is for those seminarians that don't have the same privilege that I do. I was very fortunate to receive an academic scholarship, so I can say, I don't want to play this game anymore. And I can still go to school, and I can still pursue ordination in the Presbyterian Church. But for a lot of folks, the only way they get to go to seminary is through a United Methodist scholarship, and there's no way for them to keep going if they don't play this game. And so right now at Wesley and at Duke and at every seminary, there are folks that don't have that privilege that are making choices in an even more rigged game. And I don't know how we fix that, and I don't have the money to set up that fund, but I hope that we'll pray and act on behalf of those seminarians caught in the system on a whole nother level, indebted to their eyeballs and playing a rigged game. So that's where I am. And it is so wonderful to see y'all, because y'all give me hope. It is so wonderful to be back and to continue to see the new things happening here. And I am so excited to continue to journey on, even though I'm on a slightly different, more reformed path. You know, and the good news is that the true kingdom will shine through. And that somehow in the breaking of bread we're going to see Christ. And here's where I saw it so real. And that grace and that welcome and that fear somehow hooked me. And I have a feeling that it all binds us together. And so as siblings, as queer sufferers, as allies and liberators in this addiction and game and path that we're all in, I'm so grateful that we're here together. Thank you.
My name is Joe Cobb, and I'm a native of Kansas. I know of which you speak. This morning, my day began when I called home to wish and sing happy birthday to my 5-year-old son, JJ, who is named James Joseph. Joseph is after me, James is after his other daddy. We've been partners for 14 years, and we have 2 children through surrogate birth who were born in California, where in California we can legally be their parents, Jenny and JJ. So I sang happy birthday to him and talked with them all. And then knowing that I was coming here today, I went back to July 4th, 2001. When I was standing over my dining room table, which was glass top, and on the tabletop were 2 frames turned upside down. I took out an X-Acto knife, and I carefully cut around the edges of the brown paper on the back of the frames. And I lifted up the brown paper backing, and one by one I pulled out 2 certificates. The first certificate was from 1985, when I was ordained a deacon in the United Methodist Church in the Kansas West Conference. The second was from 1991 when I was ordained an elder in the United Methodist Church, Kansas West Conference. I took those certificates, I put them in a manila envelope, and I sealed it. And I took the remnants of the frames outside and threw them in the trash. The next day, on July 5th, I got in my car, and I drove through the gorgeous Flint Hills, Kansas, to Topeka, the home of Fred Phelps, and the Bishop of the United Methodist Church. I did not go to see Fred. I went to see Fritz Muty, who was our bishop at that time. We sat down and we talked about the complaints that had been filed against me. We had met the week before. Complaints that essentially said that I had manipulated a dear friend of mine who was also married at the time, as was I, that I had manipulated him over the course of 4 years into a homosexual lifestyle. And I thought, well, I've come to discover since then that one of the real gifts of homosexuals is that we are stellar recruiters. Stellar. And manipulators, and predators, and stalkers, and we're right on par with bestiality and murderers. Many of those of which I was referred to during the complaint process. So I handed my credentials to Bishop Muty, and he received them with grace and with sadness. As I got back in the car and drove back through the Flint Hills, I felt a lightness that I had never felt before in my life. And it was a lightness tinged with sadness, but also tinged with freedom and liberation. And when I got back home, I called my best friend, Larry. And he said, we need to have a party because you are free. You can be out. And he said, in fact, we need to get you on the cover of Out magazine, which, for those of you who don't know, is not the United Methodist Communications newsletter. It is a magazine about being gay, lesbian, bisexual, and transgender in the world. As I reflected on those moments 14 years ago, I decided to bring a few things out of the closet with me today. The first being the last book of discipline I ever bought, which was the 2000 Book of Discipline, and I really hope I can get Frank and Jimmy and some of the rest of you to sign this for me. And I realized that I, as of that moment, was no longer under the exclusive thumb of the Book of Discipline. As much as I love much of what is in there, so much of it is contradictory, and it needs to be changed. I also brought with me my ordination stole as a deacon and as an elder. And this is the first time I've ever worn it since 2001. And I wear it because it reminds me of how far I've come since then. I met my partner, James. We have 2 children. I was blessed to write a book with my former spouse, the other love of my life, Leanne Taylor, who is an ordained deacon in the United Methodist Church in Blacksburg, Virginia. We wrote this book about our family's journey, and we pray that what God has done in our family, God might do in the United Methodist Church. I was ordained in 2006 in the Metropolitan Community Churches, who honored me as a transfer clergy from the United Methodist Church. And I've served 2 churches, MCC Winston-Salem and MCC at the Blue Ridge in Roanoke, Virginia, where I currently serve as pastor. Since October of last year, when Virginia became one of the 37 states to recognize same-sex marriage. I've performed over 35 weddings. Including straight couples. Our biggest growth in the Metropolitan Community Church right now is straight people who have found our church and are there because of its full welcome to inclusion. Every church needs to be that way. We don't need to be that way. There's a song that has always been one of my favorites. Having grown up in the United Methodist Church, being one of those kids as a youth who went to committee meetings, and adults would look at me and go, that's just weird. You want to go to the administrative council? You want to go to council on ministries? I wanted to learn everything. I wanted to immerse myself in it. And it wasn't until I was called to ministry in 1981 that I realized that God had been working on me through all of it. And when I was ordained for the third time in the Metropolitan Community Churches, my sister Nancy, and there are 4 of us who were adopted by my parents, all from different families. She said, you know, I see this ordination as an affirmation of God's original call in Joe's life. And I really loved it, because it said to me that everything I experienced in the United Methodist Church is a gift. What I had to decide was those things that had been covered in shame, I needed to take the shame off and rediscover the gift. So the Book of Discipline, this stole, the United Methodist hymnal are gifts in my life that have informed me and taught me and will continue to do so. And I want to close by sharing a verse of a hymn from someone whom I think is probably the greatest hymn writer of all time, Charles Wesley. Finish then thy new creation, pure and spotless let us be. Let us see thy great salvation, perfectly restored in thee. Changed from glory into glory, till in heaven we take our place, till we cast our crowns before thee, lost in wonder, love, and praise. God has blessed me and all of us to live lives in which we can be lost in wonder, love, and praise. Thank you for your hospitality.
Following that in my worship tradition, one responds to the Spirit spontaneously. I don't sing, but could we, because of the truth and the faith and the honesty and the hope that we felt in these moments, could we sing, there's a sweet, sweet Spirit in this place? I can't sing. Can someone lead us in singing that? There's a
Sweet, sweet Spirit in this place, and I know that it's the Spirit of the Lord. There are sweet expressions on each face, and I know that it's the Spirit of the Lord. Sweet we have been